President Trump is threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act to crack down on protests after a second shooting involving a federal officer in Minneapolis. The president writes on social media that if Minnesota politicians don't stop people from attacking ICE agents, he will, quote, quickly put an end to the travesty. DHS says a federal officer shot a man last night after they say the man ran from a targeted traffic stop and attacked the officer. The shooting touched off hours of clashes between protesters and law enforcement just a week after an immigration agent, that is, killed a woman in the city. And now the escalating immigration crackdown is raising some legal questions about interactions with federal agents. ABC News legal contributor James Sample is here for more on that. Hi, James. Thanks for coming on. So when can the president invoke the Insurrection Act, and how strong is the president's case for doing that in Minneapolis?
Diane, the president has broad discretion to invoke the Insurrection Act. It is a very, very ambiguous statute, and when it is invoked, which is very rarely, to be clear, this has not been invoked since 1992 in the aftermath or in during the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. So we're not talking about something that presidents do lightly, and historically they have chosen not to do it, in part because when invoked, the grant of authority to military officers who would otherwise be barred by what's known as the Posse Comitatus Act, which is a fancy name for a statute that generally bars domestic deployments of the federal military on domestic soil for law enforcement purposes. But when the Insurrection Act is invoked, it is an exception to that Posse Comitatus Act. And once invoked, the Insurrection Act gives the president extraordinarily broad discretion, and courts generally defer to the president with respect to just how much discretion that is. So it is potentially a dramatic expansion and militarization of domestic law enforcement.
And in terms of interactions with the agents themselves, when can a federal agent confront you about your immigration status? And do you have to show proof that you're in the country legally if they do?
So federal agents are, whether they're ICE, whether they're the FBI, whether the Department of Homeland Security, are required to have probable cause which means that they need to have a good reason to stop someone. They can't just stop someone randomly for the purpose of checking your immigration status or otherwise. And with respect to the protests and the sort of interactions that are occurring between protesters and law enforcement, the First Amendment is extraordinary. It's one of the unique and wonderful things about the United States, but it's not absolute. Oftentimes, the core of the First Amendment, especially with respect to protester rights, come down to what is known as time, place, and manner restrictions. And that just means exactly what it sounds like. The government can respect your First Amendment rights by giving you a time, a place, and a manner in which you can peacefully exercise your protest rights. That often means in public spaces, sidewalks, as opposed to private property. It means that the time can be limited to, for example, allow people to sleep in their residential neighborhood. And it means that the manner needs to be peaceful.
James, some newly released video shows agents using a battering ram to enter an immigrant home's family in Minneapolis. Their attorney is calling this an illegal search, saying agents didn't have the right warrant for forcible entry. What kind of authorization do officers need to enter a home? And what are your rights if an agent knocks on your door?
So important questions, and certainly I don't want to answer anything specific about that particular search because we don't have all of the facts yet. But as a general matter, there is an important distinction that viewers need to recognize, and that is, and law enforcement certainly recognizes, and that is that there is a distinction between what's known as an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant. ICE agents typically have administrative warrants. Administrative warrants do not give ICE or other law enforcement agents the right to enter a home without consent. Judicial warrants, which are signed by a judge indicating probable cause of a crime, those warrants do give the agents the right to enter without permission. So if an ICE agent or if another federal agent is to knock on someone's door and demand entry, you have the right as a citizen or non-citizen to deny entry absent them showing you proof of a judicial as opposed to administrative warrant.
What about documenting? Are you allowed to film an interaction with immigration agents?
Absolutely. You have a right to film. You have a right to document. You just need to do so in a manner that does not meaningfully interfere with the law enforcement agent's activity. So that's ambiguous, and there are line drawing questions involved as to just how far away, for example, one needs to stand in order to not be interfering. And certainly some of the interactions that we've seen at least portray the possibility that some of these federal law enforcement agents are trying to, in fact, provoke interference, so that the interference itself can then become the predicate for the interaction and subsequently even an arrest. So it is important to document. It is a core part of the First Amendment. It is a core part of the rights that you have as a citizen or non-citizen, but it is also important to do so in a manner that doesn't meaningfully obstruct law enforcement.
And James, what about people protesting ICE? What constitutes protected speech and what crosses the line?
Well, you certainly have the right to protest policy. You certainly have the right to peacefully assemble. You have the right, and there are the rights to counter protest against protesters. What is not protected is violence, vandalism, true threats, and incitement to violence. Those are the categories where, if you cross those lines, you tend to lose or at least have significantly reduced First Amendment protection.
And some top administration officials have suggested ICE agents have absolute immunity. Some legal experts have refuted that. So how much immunity do ICE agents and other federal agents have? And what happens if they cross the line?
It's an important, and it is a deeply, deeply muddy and complex question. There was a case from many years ago called Bivens v. United States, which basically gave a constitutional right to a remedy when your federal civil rights were violated by law enforcement agents. But the Supreme Court, over the span of decades, has dramatically curtailed that precedent without expressly overruling it. And so what has happened is that we've seen a divide between the rights that one can assert against federal law enforcement and the rights that one can assert against state law enforcement. It is a contested, controversial position, but I think that the claim that federal agents have absolute immunity does go too far.
All right, James Sample, thank you.